hello!
Yeah. I should challenge you to a duel.
Well, name the place.
Show me your weapon.
My weapon?
Show it, yes.
What do you mean?
Oh, no, your weapon of choice.
Oh, right. Here.
So tiny.
Well, show me yours.
Haha.
Big one. Compensating for something.
Oh, gods.
Ha!
Ha! A double-bladed axe. Ha! That's not Vikingish.
Who cares?
Well, I do, and I will take the opportunity to talk about that on this video.
Oh, why do you have to bring history to every game? Oh, you're a nuisance.
Let's get started. Hello friends, how are you? My name is Arya Theriger, and today I'm going to talk about 5 misconceptions people have about the Vikings, but on this video I will only focus on their weaponry. This first misconception about the weapons the Norse did or did not use is that the Norse did not use bow and arrow. The typical idea people have about Vikings and the rest of the Norse for that matter is that they only used swords in combat and occasionally spears and axes. This idea was probably made by the general popularization of Northern American cinema. Archery was not one of the main arts of war used by the Nordic armies, but it was still used pretty often. In fact, there are many historical and archaeological sources that show us that the Norse did use the bow and arrow quite often, especially in mountainous places when there was the need for small parties to attack quick and from afar, trying to avoid melee combat in harsh environments, when a lot of clothing was needed to keep the body warm and therefore body movements were limited, and it would be harder to handle other weapons. Also, archery was taught at a very young age. Children would learn the art of archery also as a back workout. The wider the back was, the further you could pull the string and apply more velocity to the arrow. I've practiced archery and it does help indeed. The second misconception is that the Scandinavian axes were gigantic two-bladed axes. This is one of the major common mistakes about Scandinavian medieval weaponry. There are loads of artistic reconstitutions of the Viking Age of Viking warriors using huge two-bladed axes, denoting a much more daunting aspect of the Norse warrior. And gaming really helped a lot in spreading this idea, especially when Vikings were the inspiration to create barbarian characters. The fact is, both battle axes and one-handed axes only had a single blade. However, when certain combat techniques of the feudal period were introduced in Scandinavia, double-bladed axes really did existed, but with very small blades. Besides, feudalism only reached Scandinavian countries in the 11th century, precisely at the end of the Viking Age. The third misconception is that the Norse used hammers in battle. This is just another misconception constructed by the mixture between myth and history. The abundant references in the mythological sources about the god Thor using a hammer was used to represent the Norse warriors using hammers in battle. This type of equipment was used in Scandinavia, but only after the introduction of feudalism and the techniques of battle of the heavy cavalry. To this day, we still have no archaeological evidences of hammers having ever been used during the Viking Age or even earlier periods. The fourth misconception is that the Vikings used crossbows. An image that has been popularized in movies, especially during the first decade of the 21st century, is the one of Germanic Scandinavian populations using crossbows in combat, especially during the early Middle Ages. This kind of weapon has been known since Eastern antiquity. The Romans used it, but this weapon did not belong to the warlike gear used by the Norse warriors during the Viking Age. There are no historical or archaeological evidences of the Norse having the knowledge or even using this type of armament during the Viking Age or earlier periods. It was only in the 13th century that the Scandinavians first used crossbows in combat. And finally, The fifth misconception is that every Viking used swords in combat. I've said this before, and well, indeed, this misconception seems to be the most popular, not only due to movies and comics and the literature, but also the mythological accounts themselves and archaeological evidences. There are many archaeological articles about the Viking Age given to the public and speaking about swords. A sword found here, a sword found there, which gives us the impression that indeed there were thousands of Viking swords and they were very common. The reason we archaeologists are so happy every time a Viking sword is found is precisely because they were not common. And when one is found, we just need to share it with everyone. As I have said before, metal to make weapons was scarce in Scandinavia. Iron, for instance, was probably the easiest to get, but still it wasn't that much and mostly found in swampy regions near the fjords and pitscapes. I'm not sure if this word even exists in the English vocabulary, but what I mean is an area where the soil is mainly composed by peat. Only wealthy people had swords, especially kings and jarls, and the Hersar, which were local Viking military commanders, mostly landowners with enough wealth to have their private guard and a tiny army. Alright friends, thank you so much for watching and I hope you have enjoyed this video. See you on the next one and tack för idag!